Good evening. My name is Carla Williams Scott, and I serve as the Director of Neighborhoods. Thank you all for joining us tonight, those of you that are with us in the audience, our panelists, and those of you that are joining us virtually. We are happy to offer this neighborhood landlord fair as part of our comprehensive neighborhood safety strategy, because we know that the foundation of safe neighborhoods is stable housing. And you're one of our most critical partners in keeping our city safe. Please know that my team in the Department of Neighborhoods, which houses 311, is also a resource for you. And any questions that you might have regarding city policies, procedures, please feel free to reach out to us at 311. You can reach out to 311 online at www.columbus.gov/311 or 614-645-3111. Tonight is the second night of our four-part Landlord Education Series. The panel here tonight includes city departments key to landlords and their properties. Our goal for tonight is to provide you with information that you have that directly affects you and your properties. There are no questions that are too small or too large. So please feel free to ask our panelists this evening. Please join me in welcoming Curtis Brown, our neighborhood program specialist, who is responsible for the program tonight. Curtis?
Thank you for that introduction, Director. Good evening, everyone. Those of you here with us this evening and those of you watching virtually. As Director mentioned, my name is Curtis Brown, and I'm a neighborhood program specialist with the Department of Neighborhoods, overseeing portions of the Comprehensive Neighborhood Safety Strategy. Tonight is our second night of our Landlord Education Series. This is our third year for doing an event catered towards providing information, education, and resources to landlords across the city of Columbus. And we're excited to be here with this wonderful panel who I'm going to introduce shortly. And we are happy that you're with us virtually and here in person. As I mentioned, we started this 3 years ago after getting feedback from our neighborhood safety committees, which are part of our comprehensive neighborhood safety strategy. We heard from residents that they needed that they had landlords in their neighborhoods that needed more resources, and they felt like they wanted to do great things, but they weren't sure where to turn or where to go. So we brought that information back, and this is where we are today, our third year doing our Landlord Education Series. Tonight is focused around city services as well as some of our partners that we work with across the city. And we are happy to have with us tonight, we have Tiara Ross, who is an assistant city attorney with the city attorney's office. We have Jeff Johnson, who is a district assistant manager for the Division of Refuse. We have Cassandra Skurlock, who is a civil court liaison with code enforcement. We have Sergeant Ed Danaher from the Columbus Division of Police with the City of Columbus. As I said, this is a great panel, and we're looking forward to a fantastic discussion this evening. We would like for you to ask questions. This is your opportunity to not only have access to ask questions, but to also get the questions that you have answered. So if you're watching us virtually via YouTube or Facebook, feel free to type your questions in the chat feature, and we will make sure to get those questions answered. If you're here with us in person, we do have a microphone over here. Please feel free to step up to the microphone to ask any of our panelists a question that you may have. And with that being said, we'll get started. As I have introduced the panelists on a surface level, I would like to go down the row and have them introduce themselves and kind of tell a little bit more about the work that you do and tell us kind of why you're here this evening and any other information that you would like to provide. And we'll start over on that end with Jeff Johnson.
Thank you. My name's Jeff Johnson. I'm with the Division of Refuse. I oversee the solid waste investigators. So basically, We're the ones that get to come out and see what's not being done with trash collection, and pretty much just try to educate the community on how to correct that. So.
My name is Cassandra Skurlock. I've been with the City of Columbus Division of Code Enforcement for about 10 years. I was out in the field for much of my career in the beginning as a code officer in the Hilltop area, proactive code enforcement, and then I'd also worked in the some of the historical districts as well. About 3 years ago, I've transitioned into the role as the civil court liaison, so I go to court to represent code enforcement in status conference settings and just provide any information, demonstrate the pictures, and explain any code violations.
Good evening. My name is Angie Plummer. I'm the Executive Director of CRIS, that's Community Refugee and Immigration Services, and so pleased to be included. CRIS partners with the city to provide social services to the new Americans. I'm excited to tell the audience a little more about what we do later, but we're a resettlement agency, so help find housing for newly arriving refugees, including those coming from Afghanistan. So excited to be here to talk about housing tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I am Tiara Ross. I'm an assistant city attorney for the city attorney Zach Klein. I am a part of the zone initiative within the city attorney's office. There's a shop of 6 of us. There are 5 zone attorneys that are assigned to each police patrol zone in the city of Columbus, north, south, east, and west. And then one of us criminally prosecutes all criminal code violations, as well as retaliatory evictions, as well as fair housing, and also refuse violations within the environmental court. So we file civil-based, property-based nuisance abatement actions. That's everything from code violations to drug houses to businesses that experience chronic criminal activity, as well as apartment complexes, so multifamily complexes, and then we also criminally prosecute in the environmental court criminal code violations as well.
And I am Sergeant Ed Danaher with the Columbus Division of Police Community Liaison Unit. Our unit has 20 officers assigned to each individual precinct, and our job is to engage with the community and to work on quality of life issues that may impact each precinct. We do it in a variety of ways. We also attend community events. We give presentations at schools, businesses, and anybody who wants it, including churches. And we work with multiple agencies throughout the city. Our job primarily is to identify a way to resolve your problem and then apply the appropriate agency to that, or the appropriate resource to that, so that we can improve the quality of life or take care of your nuisance on your precinct.
Great information. Thank you for those introductions. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started with some questions. And with the first one, we'll start off with code enforcement. There are some tenants that are supposed to perhaps mow their own grass. And there's a landlord or possibly a tenant in that property that's wondering why they're getting a notice for their high grass. Could you kind of talk about that?
So the City of Columbus, the code section regarding high grass and weeds is that the grass cannot exceed 12 inches in height. And so the notices that we will issue or we'll send it out to the property owner. And if we have the information for the tenant, we will send it to them as well. But ultimately, it's the property owner's responsibility to, make sure that that the grass is cut, that trash is picked up, and things of that nature.
Great. And speaking of a violation of notice, which of course when some things are kept prolonged, that could possibly get them into court. So Tiara, could you kind of talk about ways that landlords could stay out of court before they get to that point if they receive a violation of notice?
Sure. Well, First, you comply with the violation notice, but if you have questions with regard to what you are being cited for, it is very important to stay in contact with the code enforcement officer. So on your notice of violation, you're always going to have a name, a phone number, an email address of who to contact at code enforcement. You're also going to be given a certain amount of days to come into compliance with whatever violation you have been cited with. Code has its own internal process, and so they allow for upwards of 30 days to take care of certain violations. And if you are in contact with code enforcement, you can also request extensions if by chance you need extended time to take care of that violation. So most of the time when we see landlords coming into court, it's because they have not been communicative with code enforcement, they haven't been responsive with code enforcement, they haven't done the things that they need to do to comply outside of court. And even once you get to court, we are what we call kinder, gentler prosecutors. So we're going to give you time to come into compliance because that's what the goal is. The goal is not punitive, it is to help you come into compliance with code violations. If there are resource opportunities that we can connect you with through the court process, we will try to do that. If you become a repeat offender though, then there's going to be some punitive aspect to what we are doing to bring you into compliance.
Great. And with Mr. Johnson, Jeff Johnson, when we speak about, of course, getting violations and bringing in code enforcement in the city attorney's office, there are some cases when a tenant will move out of a property and they will leave their trash and furniture and things like that out on the curb. If there are items that are being disposed of by a tenant or a resident after they moved out, what happens during that process after those items are out?
So again, it's going to become the property owner's responsibility to dispose of those items. If the tenant's moving out and scheduling to get rid of their furniture before they go, they can absolutely schedule that with us. We provide the service to a resident. But we definitely don't service any property that's been vacant or abandoned. So once the property owner is setting it out at the curb, it's then the property owner's responsibility to find a way to dispose of that. So at that point, that's no longer part of the city service to remove those items. So we'll come out and post an order that informs the property owner that they need to do that within a certain amount of time. Again, kind of like Tiara said, we're compliance is the golden word. We just want you to get rid of it the right way. We'll work with you if you make contact with us on what time you need or how you're getting rid of that. But ultimately, it's not a provided city service.
Great. And if someone wants to get in contact with you to kind of work through getting this problem solved, would they go through 311? Is there a direct number that goes straight to refuse? How would they get in contact with you?
And those city orders that she mentioned are posted on the door and mailed to the property owner, and there is a contact name and number on there that gets us directly, but always calling 311 absolutely works. They'll let us know right away, and it puts it in the record that the contact's been made. So even if we don't get a hold of you within the 72 hours that are given, it's at least on record that the call was made and we're trying to work together.
Great. Moving to Sergeant Danaher, we had a conversation earlier around the job of a community liaison officer, being able to be out in the community, be at area commission meetings and community meetings of that nature. And you and I spoke about how the important role of that a CLO plays between working with other city departments. Could you kind of talk about how there are ways that a CLO will work with a code enforcement officer or a refuse officer or city attorney representative? Could you kind of speak about that?
We get, a prime example would be, we get 311 complaints, particularly on the homeless. And an example would be, we have several homeless living in a garage, there's trash everywhere. Can you help us? We'll send our officers out. We will engage with any of the homeless we find there, find out if they live there. In some cases, we identify the property owner. Most of the time, the property needs secure, and that becomes a responsibility of code because now you're in violation of the basic ordinances. So my officers will then contact code enforcement Most of them are familiar with the code enforcement officer on their precinct and work very closely with them. The other thing we will do is we can also ask that the 311 be reassigned after we take our action. And a good example is today I reassigned a 311 that we had addressed, and I sent it to both code and to the Department of Refuse to address, because not only was the garage open and accessible, but there was significant trash, not only in the yard, but in the alleys. So I sent one to code and one to the Department of Refuse. Now, when it comes time to address those, if they need our assistance, because you have chronic homeless individuals who are residing there or refuse to leave, then the police department, mostly the CLOs, will go and assist either the CLO or refuse if they ask. That's an example of one way we work with other city departments to resolve community problems.
All right, thank you for that. Kind of switching gears just a little bit to Ms. Plummer, Angie Plummer, who is with us from Chris this evening. Just kind of a general question about your organization. Of course, we know that New Americans play a major role in our neighborhoods. Could you kind of talk about the things that Chris that does for New Americans and how landlords also in turn play a huge role when New Americans come to our city?
Sure, I'll jump to the services that we do that relate most to housing, and that's, finding an apartment before somebody arrives, securing that apartment, furnishing it, and then even though our technical term of service with the newly arrived person is only 90 days, we've established a relationship and they'll come back to us when there are problems with maintenance. Part of our role also, though, is to educate the tenant on timely payment of rent, how to pay the rent, like where to go and drop off the rent. During COVID, it was a particular challenge when offices were closed, trying to figure out just how to make that rental payment. So that's a role that we can help play to bridge that gap between landlord and tenant. And also, we have a lot of language capacity on staff, so we can help tenants and property managers communicate better and come up with solutions.
Great. And there are ways that a landlord can work with your organization to help house New Americans when they arrive?
Yes, I think like the other panelists, our goal is to resolve a problem, and we're happy to work together with landlords to try to educate the tenants on their rights and responsibilities and make sure landlords know when one of the refugees we're working with has a problem. They may not have communicated it well. They typically come from cultures where they don't keep a paper trail, so they may have stopped by the office and they think they've told someone there was a problem, but they didn't really understand the process for effectively doing that, keeping a paper trail, that kind of thing. So.
Great. Great, thank you for that. I want to remind everyone, those of you joining us virtually, if you have questions, please feel free to enter those into the chat feature on the virtual platform. And also, if you're joining us in person, feel free to step to the microphone if you have questions. I also wanted to mention that if you go to our website for this event, which is columbushousing2021.com, there is a PDF document that can be downloaded that is full of resources that not only have to do with, that represent the organizations that are with us here today, but several other organizations from across the city that has literature that caters directly towards landlords. And those of you here in person, you receive that information in a folder. So please visit our website, columbushousing2021.com, to get that document. And with that, let's continue with some other questions. Going back to Jeff Johnson, could you kind of talk about if there are items that may be too big to fit into a trash container, what someone may do about that, a property owner or a landlord, property management, and also kind of as a second part to that, if you could discuss the 300 and the 90-gallon difference.
Sure. So obviously, the items that can fit into a container between the 90s and 300s are considerably different. But if the item will fit into a container, we would prefer that a resident just dispose of it by putting it into the container. But there are many furniture items, household items that are much larger, and that is still a city-provided service. You can place that out at the curb where you would normally place your trash, or you can place it at the alley if you have a 300-gallon service. But more importantly is that you call 311 and schedule for us to service that. I think in years past, the city used to come through and just kind of pick up what was out there, but we now only go to what's scheduled. So it's really important that residents call 311 and let us know that you have something for us to pick up. We do not collect any kind of construction debris. If you go to the 311 website, it will definitely let you know on there what we do or don't pick up, or if you call and speak to someone in person, if it's an item that we don't service, they'll let you know how to get rid of that. But we do appliances, we do furniture, we take care of most anything that a resident needs to get rid of. So, difference between a 90-gallon and a 300-gallon service. The scheduling alone is considerably different. 90 gallons are done on a rotating schedule. So the holidays do affect when you're scheduled. 311 can definitely let you know what your service day is as a new resident. They can also let you know when it's going to change. 300-gallon service is basically a Monday through Thursday scheduled service that will slide back a day during a holiday, but it goes right back to the normal service afterwards. So,
I'm glad you mentioned that, especially with the holidays coming up soon. Moving to Tiara Ross from the City Attorney's Office, could you kind of talk about the City Attorney's Office approach to multi-family properties, multi-unit properties?
Sure. So it's a little bit different of an approach that we use. As you can imagine, it's pretty much of a direct process when we have single-family homes. When you have multi-family homes, typically they are properties that you're going to see a multiplicity of code violations at. And so depending on how many code violations a particular multi-family complex has, we will sit down with property management, attempt to try to work with property management on a compliance schedule so they can bring the property into compliance. So there's typically a pretty long period of time before that property gets into court, but we try to engage with those property owners quicker. You're going to see the attorneys at the beginning, and we're going to kind of walk you through the process for complying with code violations. If we get to a point whereby you are no longer compliant or moving forward in progress, then at that point in time, we will file a lawsuit just as we would with a single-family home. We also include several of the divisions, so we will incorporate refuse, we will incorporate code enforcement, we will incorporate the building department, we will also incorporate CPD. If there are issues of crime at that particular multifamily complex, then we will also have, the CLOs are super helpful in going out and doing what's called a SEPTED safety inspection, whereby they will go and test the locks, and they will test the lighting, and they will issue suggestions or recommendations to the property owner about how to uplift that property from a safety perspective. So we certainly use a comprehensive approach when it comes to apartment complexes. In the court process, again, we try to work towards compliance, but there is a point in time whereby we will have property owners that are levied with significant fines for failure to come into compliance with code, because as you know, we have lots of large apartment complexes, we have lots of affordable housing apartment complexes, and we are of the belief that just because you live at a certain place doesn't mean that you have to go through not having clean, sanitary living conditions as well as safe living conditions. So definitely more of a comprehensive approach to apartment complexes, but essentially the same process from a legal perspective.
Great. Thank you for that. Angie Plummer, this question is for you. When of course, you've explained what Chris does, your organization. Does Chris only serve refugees?
No, Chris serves U.S. citizens, serves new Americans who are in varying statuses, Our resettlement program works with refugees because of the nature of the program, but our immigration legal services, for example, could be a U.S. citizen applying for a family member, people from varying backgrounds. So no, not just refugees.
Great, great information. Moving to Cassandra from Code Enforcement, could you kind of talk about when there are junk vehicles that are left on properties? I know that sometimes we hear that from residents. Could you kind of go through the process of from when your team may get that 311 service request to when the actual vehicle is removed or when the tenant is served a notice and what that looks like?
Yes, so there will be times when we will issue notice because there is what we call an inoperable vehicle, and that could mean that the vehicle doesn't have tags, it's got 2 or more flat tires, missing parts, that make it appear to be inoperable. So we will issue notice. We typically, if it's an occupied property, we issue notice to the property owner. But we will also reach out and try to find the information for the tenant so that we can serve them the notice as well, since they are probably responsible for having the inoperable vehicle there. We allow some time, again, as Tiara touched on, communication is key. We want to work with people as much as we can. Sometimes there's some extenuating circumstances, title issues and things like that. So we try to give as much time as we can to have the situation come into compliance. So whether that means the vehicle becomes operable or if it's maybe removed or put into a different spot, like inside of a garage. If a inoperable vehicle is perhaps left by a tenant, so somebody moves out and leaves an old junk vehicle there at the property owner can actually submit. We've got a form to fill out, and we take that and submit it to the impound lot. They'll come and remove the vehicle in that case if it's been abandoned. So that's how we deal mostly with the inoperable vehicles.
Great. And kind of a follow-up for that, that's a junk vehicle that's on a property. Could you talk about if there are vehicles that are working but they're parked on grassy areas, they're parked in the yards, and talk about the process for that as well?
Yes, so similar thing. These are all what we call zoning code violations. So if there's vehicles parked on the grass, or if there's some trailers or other equipment parked in the yard area, then again, we follow the same process. We issue notice to the owner, try to find information for the tenant as well, because again, those are usually tenant-controlled issues. And so everybody that's affected by it has the notice and the means to communicate with us and let us know how they're working on that and their timeline for resolving it.
Great, thank you. Jeff Johnson, talking about when we are speaking of refuse and dumping and things of that nature, if there's a property owner who is noticing that not their tenant is illegally dumping on their property, but someone else is, what would that landlord do? What would that tenant do in order to have someone step in to kind of remedy that illegal dumping?
Again, the number one contact being 311. If you give a call to 311, let them know everything you know. If you possibly have information on who dumped it there, if you know their name, if you have a license plate number, give us any information you can on where it came from. We'll go look for those folks. We clean up an awful lot of illegal dump materials that we just don't know where it came from. So we're usually not going to come to a property owner to tell them that they're responsible for it. unless we can prove that it came from your tenant. So if you or your tenant can provide us with any information on where it did come from, we'll go down that route. If we get to the pile and we do find that it came from your tenant, ultimately it is the property owner's responsibility. I have to have proof that the tenant put it there, but if I don't have the proof that it came from the tenant, it's going to be the property owner that we're going to talk to about making sure it gets cleaned up properly.
Great. We actually have a question from one of our virtual platforms. I believe this would either be for Cassandra or Sergeant Danaher. The question reads, vehicle is operable, but is left to sit for a long period of time. How long before cited, and what causes it to be cited?
The code speaks to a vehicle has to be moved. If it's legally parked on the street and operable, it has to be moved every 72 hours. It can move 6 inches or it can move a quarter of a mile, as long as it's moved. The problem we have sometimes is manpower. So when people call and say they have an issue with a vehicle that's parked out in front of their home and it's been there for 72 hours and the neighbor refuses to move it, runs of higher priority take precedent and the police goes to those. Some of those end up in our bailiwick, CLOs, if the member is working, say, with a block watch or a civic group, or even just looks up his CLO's number in the city directory, we can have a CLO go out and take a look at it. In some cases, we can have it removed in 72 hours. Usually, we try to find out who owns it and speak to them so that we can resolve that problem without having to tow the vehicle. But I'll give you an example. 2 weeks ago, I was assisting on a precinct that doesn't have a liaison officer. And I was there on a noise complaint. The guy leaves for work at 2 in the morning and he doesn't have a muffler on his car. So he wakes everybody up, and then when he comes home, 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning, he wakes everybody up again. So I went out to talk to the property owner, talk to the individual who had the loud muffler. And in the process, I had a gentleman come up to me and say, hey, this van has been here for months and hasn't moved. Can you do something about it? So I did what a good liaison officer would do. I said, I'll take care of it. Let me follow up on it. So I got the license number. I got the number of the business off of the truck. I went back, I made a few phone calls, and before you know it, the company didn't know the employee had left that truck there in front of everybody's house, and he was using his personal truck because he liked it better. I went back in 2 days, the truck was gone. So a good liaison is going to try to resolve the issue without towing the vehicle, but if he has to, sometimes that's the only option.
Can I piggyback
Sure,
on that from
absolutely.
the code enforcement perspective? So if a vehicle is parked in a driveway and in an approved parking spot, then we don't have any requirements for movement of the vehicle, just as long as it is operable, as in it has current registration and tags displayed, no flat tires, missing wheels, missing windshields, things of that nature.
Great information. Kind of sticking with you, Cassandra, and code enforcement. For someone that they may have a question, why am I getting a violation notice for damage that my tenant caused? So if you're coming in after maybe someone has moved out, and or if they're still there and they're wondering why they're getting a violation of notice for something that they didn't do, could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, so we are frequently called to do an interior inspection at tenant-occupied properties, usually by the tenant, because there's been some type of complaint or issue that they're having, and the landlord has maybe been slow to respond or non-responsive. So they've asked code enforcement to come in and do an inspection. It may have something, a tenant issue that they're focused on, maybe one or two things, but as code enforcement, we are there to inspect the entire unit, top to bottom, inside and out. And so we will identify all code violations while we're there and include those on our violation notice that we send to the property owner. But some of those issues could have been caused by the tenant. So maybe there's some holes in the wall or some flooring that's been torn up or, other things like that. We don't identify who is responsible for certain damage. We just identify what is a code violation on that date that we are there. So again, ultimately, it becomes the property owner's responsibility to fix those issues. If there's some concern with, that they were caused by the tenants, that's an issue that they'd have to seek a counsel for to, address directly with their tenant or, bill back or something like that. But we don't get involved with that. We just identify the code violations at the time of inspection.
Great. Thanks for that. Angie Plummer, going back to speaking about Chris, if there's a landlord who's watching and they want to get involved with your organization and get involved with helping to house new Americans, what are some things that they could do when they contact your organization? Do you have programs that they could enroll in? Could you kind of speak about that?
Well, we set up an email address that would go directly to our housing coordinator at refugiehousing@chris-ohio.org. And the recipient of that message is trying to find landlords who are willing to lease to new Americans. And so my objective tonight is to talk a little bit about the support that they receive from social service agencies and to explain the amount of federal funding they come with and how we can patch together their rents so that you feel more secure that they'll pay their rent obligations. With the agency, we have all kinds of supportive services trying to make sure landlord-tenant rights are well explained. That's part of our obligation for the resettlement program.
Okay, thank you for that. Tierra, the city attorney's office has a lot of work that they do with landlords and property owners and things of that nature. Could you talk about the role of the real estate division within the city attorney's office?
So the role of the real estate division within the city attorney's office is essentially to support city divisions and properties that they acquire. So a lot of times we won't necessarily work directly with individual landlords unless there's an issue whereby it abuts a city property and or a city entity is trying to purchase that particular land. But most of the time, the zoned initiative is the division of the city attorney's office that's dealing specifically with landlords who have rental properties within the city of Columbus.
Great, great. Again, those of you joining us virtually, if you have questions, please put those in the chat feature and we will get those answered for you. And those of you joining us here in person, feel free to step to the microphone to ask a question if you have any questions. This is a question for the whole panel that I'd like for everyone to answer. And we'll start down with you, Jeff, and come this way. When we talk about, we all hear things in the neighborhood. For example, it could be, well, I heard that refuse can't do this because of this and this. Or I heard that the city attorney's office won't step in until it gets this bad. Could you kind of talk about some things that maybe you've heard from your boots on the ground team members that they have maybe brought back that it may not be as bad as it may seem? So for example, if someone is illegally dumping and the resident may say, well, I heard they have to have 500 311 tickets before they do something. Could you kind of talk about something that you hear that's necessarily not true and kind of educate the landlords and our residents who are watching on what actually happens and what actually takes place? And that's kind of for the whole panel as well, depending on what your area of expertise is.
Sure, I'm glad you said that about the 500 service requests versus just having one, because we're not going to address them any differently. In fact, if I get multiple complaints on the same item, I'm going to close most of them out, just simply saying it's a duplicate, sending them back to the original service request. We are complaint-driven. Sadly, I don't have the staff to just go out and look for issues. So until a resident calls in to let us know that there's an issue out there, we don't go out looking for it, which I think is a big misconception. A lot of people feel like we come out to pick on them and only want to address their problems and not what the neighbors are doing. I'm only coming out because someone told us that you were doing this. Sure, when I'm in the area, if I notice the 3 people living around you are doing the same thing, I'm going to address the same issue at all those places. But a big misconception is that I'm not trying to pick on anyone. I'm coming out because somebody told us that this was an issue, and multiple complaints about the same issue does not get any faster response from us. We're going to come out no matter 1 call or 500, as you said.
And actually, so we also hear the same thing about, feeling targeted or feeling picked on, whenever there's code violation notices being sent out. And we are also primarily complaint-driven, so we're not out in the field picking on particular properties or property owners. It's usually a complaint called in by a tenant at the property, or sometimes neighbors or people, other passerbys that notice some things occurring that concern them, and they call that into 311, and it comes to us at code enforcement. So that's service requests, and address those is through 311.
I guess a couple things come to mind. We've hear on occasion, well, I can't lease to someone without a social security number, or I can't lease to refugees because I need a background check. And by definition, all refugees will get a social security number. They just don't necessarily have it on the day that they enter. But they will have it, and they're lawfully here. And they've been through significant background checks before they even entered the country. So any refugee would have a more significant background check, I would say, than most people in general.
I think there are a few things from the city attorney's office perspective. I'm sure that you know that there are a few things. I think we'll start with the city attorney's ability to be proactive is very limited because we are an enforcement arm, which means that something has to have happened there or is ongoing at a particular property before the city attorney's office can step in. So quite often when we do step in, we are able to resolve things quickly sometimes. Some of you may have heard of what's called a TRO, when there's a very dangerous drug house or dangerous place, whereby we can go before the judge in an ex parte hearing and explain to the judge, this is very, very dangerous. We don't have time to wait for a long time. We need to shut it down right away. That is a process, but it is reserved for very dangerous places that are causing imminent harm or could cause imminent harm to neighborhoods, to city departments that respond, first responders that respond to that particular property. Most of the time we are dealing with non-violent issues, and so it's going to take a longer time to come to compliance. And we oftentimes have to balance the burden of the neighbors, but also knowing that individuals that come into court have rights, and that also causes for the court process to take a longer time than what most community folks would like to see. But if we are not following those rights, then everything that we do could potentially be undone. So we have to just continuously remind community members that we are dealing with issues that are involving constitutional rights, very significant rights of others. And so we have to make sure that we are following an appropriate process within the court system to make sure that when we do something, if we are able to resolve an issue, that issue is not undone in the appellate process, right? And everything, all the work that we've done is for naught. I think another complaint that we hear a lot is that we are just kicking folks out of their homes, which is certainly not true. Our office, again, is compliance driven. If we by chance encounter an individual that is living in their home but unable to bring their property into compliance for various mental health reasons, for physical ailments, for financial barriers, we are very, very willing and have resources to help that individual, and will oftentimes have cases on the docket for a long time in an effort to help that individual come to compliance, or connecting that individual to resources that could help them come into compliance. So there's a lot that the city attorney's office does, but I think the big takeaway is that we are an enforcement arm. So there's very little that we can do before something happens. So a lot of times your worst of the worst properties will get to us, then we have to go through a court process, which then takes a longer period of time, but ultimately we can take care of it and handle it.
I think when it comes to the police, I think the biggest issue we seem to face with the community is one of expectation. The problems that you have with a vacant property, whether it's homelessness or high grass or high weeds or whatever that concern is that's impacting the neighbor. To the neighbor, it's a significant issue. And they have an expectation of what the police should do, and they want it done now. A lot of times, the time to resolve that problem is not the time frame they're looking at. The other thing that we run into is your expectation of what the police should do may be unreasonable, or we can't meet that expectation. And again, not in your timeline. An example would be let's say a vacant house that continually gets broken into, and there is trash everywhere, and it's just a nuisance in the neighborhood. We go there, we clear the homeless out that we can, if they're there. If they're not and the property's open, we present it to code. That means a code officer has to come out. The code officer writes the property up, he writes his order, he goes back to the office, he sends his notice out. By the time the property owner gets the notice, it may be 2 weeks from the time you called about that complaint, and it's still there bothering you. And so these are some of the issues. You have an expectation, I want the police to come out and arrest that homeless person. Well, the police don't necessarily want to arrest homelessness for being homeless, because the courts don't want to see them. They'll spend a night in jail and they'll be released. And the other problem we run into is when they come out of the court system, they're still homeless. And where they're going to go? They're going to go back to where they're familiar. And so it's kind of like a circulating problem. So in the case of issues like homeless, we want this resolved now. People don't want it in their neighborhoods, and I understand that. Sometimes the expectations of the community or the individual aren't expectations that the police department can meet. So sometimes it's just a matter of sitting down and communicating this, and where we do that is we do it in community meetings, we do it at block watches, we do it at phone calls with our customers, and sometimes they're not happy and sometimes they're very understanding. But the big one for us is time, expectation. Why isn't this problem getting resolved in a timely manner? Code will tell you if the property owner doesn't respond to the 30-day notice, then they go to court and the problem just extends. And many times what we find is my officers will contact code and they'll go, it's already in litigation. And we're 6-8 months into the problem. Police can't really do things sometimes that people want us to do. So I think maybe the police department might need to do a better job of explaining that to some of our customers.
All right. Thanks for those. Were all great points and things that us in the Department of Neighborhoods, we hear a lot. So I think coming directly from you all, being a part of your organizations, I think is very helpful. We're going to go to one of our audience members who has a question. If you wouldn't mind stepping up to the mic.
Yes. My question is that what about repeat offenders? I have a tenant that parks on their driveway or they doing something and then they meet compliance and they're doing it, and then maybe a month or two later they're back doing the same thing. Is the punishment the second time harder than the first, or is there no type of penalty when it's a repeat offender?
Great question.
Sure. Since you asked about punishment, we'll talk about punishment. So once they get to, actually, I'll start a little bit before then. So when code enforcement identifies a code violation of which you are speaking about, they will cite that individual If that individual has been cited before, they will identify that individual as a repeat offender for the attorneys that review the cases. If it is an individual that we can identify or that code enforcement can identify, likely repeat offenders, instead of going down the civil route, will go through the criminal process, which is very different, right? Civil route, you're gonna get fines and an injunction. Criminal route, you could possibly be looking at jail time and fines as well. So that's a difference in punitive results for repeat offenders. But if we go down the civil route, what happens is we're able to prove by clear and convincing evidence that this individual violated an ordinance of the code. They are permanently enjoined from further maintaining a nuisance, not only at that particular property, but at any other property within Franklin County. If they are found doing that same thing again, we could file contempt. They would be in contempt of court, which opens up a plethora of other legal recourse for the court in those instances. So I will say that repeat offenders, there is the opportunity for repeat offenders to be more heavily punished or significantly punished than individuals that are just offending one time. Yep.
Great question. Again, we're getting ready to wrap up, but we really appreciate that question. And just as we kind of wrap up here in the next couple of minutes, if there are any other questions that our virtual viewers would like to say, please send those through our virtual chat feature. So as we start to wrap up, this is a final question for the whole panel, and we'll start with you, Sergeant Danaher, if that's okay. As we think about the work that we do in our different agencies and our different departments, what are some ways that landlords could be helpful to build a bridge between the city and them, and also vice versa between your organization and landlords and property owners?
I think being able to communicate with the landlord and/or the property owner is the key to a lot of what we do. The difficult part often is getting a hold of the landlord on our end or the property owner. We don't have the resources to go out of state or to have people answer a phone or respond to a mailing. So I think the key here is to be able to, if we could communicate with them, if we could engage with them, I think that there would be, I think they'd be more apt to understand why we're doing the things we do, and possibly be a better tenant and landlord.
Great.
I would echo Sergeant Danaher's sentiments. I think 80% of code enforcement violations never make it to my desk because they are dealt with outside of court, because landlords are communicative to the enforcement agency or the enforcement body assigned to enforce. So just making sure that you are staying communicative with folks who are trying to reach out to you. Don't ignore a city letter, don't ignore a city notice, follow up, figure out what's wrong. But also, we get a lot of folks coming in saying, I didn't know that was an issue. So if you're going to own property, understanding that it's your responsibility to understand the laws and the ordinances of the city of Columbus. Making sure it's public record, go through it, look at it. We're always available to answer questions with regard to certain ordinances, what they mean for you practically, because I understand a lot of them can be terms that you don't understand and need to be broken down into layman's terms. Totally understand that. But just understanding that when you buy a piece of property in the city of Columbus, you have a responsibility to maintain that property. If you live in California and you want to purchase property in Columbus and make money from that property, you must know that you also have to maintain that property. And so if you do not have the capacity to do that, either one, don't purchase the property, or find a property manager that's local that can help identify issues and fix them in a responsible and expeditious manner when necessary.
Well, just echoing the communication theme, clearly so many problems develop because of a lack of communication, and certainly we see the added layer of English being an obstacle. So just one small example, landlord put a sign up on the drop box for rent It was some kind of holiday. It was a Monday, and said to put the rent back behind the office, you know, that nobody's here. And so for someone who can't read English, and they went to the door and they tried every which way to pay and they didn't know, and then ended up with a late fee because they didn't pay their rent on time. And just being thoughtful about how to communicate with people, get someone to help you. You know, there's apps that you can easily use and have brief conversations in about any language with a tenant, and help stop some of those problems, you know, before they get going.
Great.
And so with code enforcement, the primary way we begin communication is usually with mailing out of a violation notice. Just making sure that information is up to date on the auditor's website, the rental contact information. If you hold your property in the name of an LLC, that the Secretary of State information, statutory agent information is up to date. And so then that will let us, you'll be able to receive the information that we're trying to send to you. And then again, you know, the communication piece that obviously there's going to be contact information there to communicate and go back and forth with some plans and timeframes for compliance. So yeah, just like anything else, the communication, but also in making your information available, you know, in some ways that we can find you and reach out to you to let you know what some outstanding issues are.
So the Division of Refuse collects trash in so many different ways. I'd say what's really important is that landlords know how we service your property and communicate that to your residents. They may be coming from someplace where we did it different, and they've never experienced that they have to take their stuff to the alley versus to the curb. They don't know that the 300 gallons in the alley are for everyone's use, and the one by them is full. Walk to the next one. Don't set your stuff on the ground. Know what your property services, how your services are provided at your property, and make sure you're communicating that to every new resident who comes in. As everybody else has said, communicate with us. If you don't know the answer to what your resident needs, 311 can answer or point you in the right direction for any city service. So give them a call, let them know what you're looking for, and they'll make sure you get in contact with the right people.
Great. Excellent. Great information tonight as we wrap up our panel. Thanks to Sergeant Danaher, Ed Danaher from Columbus Division of Police, City Attorney's Office, Tierra Ross, Angie Plummer from Chris, Cassandra Skurlock from Civil Court Liaison from our Code Enforcement, and Jeff Johnson from our Division of Refuse. Thank you for joining us tonight, and let's give them a round of applause. And while we're ending our panel portion of tonight's event, we're moving to a special guest that we would like to welcome. And to do that introduction, I would like to welcome our Department of Neighborhood's New American Initiative Coordinator, Abdi Sofe. If you could please come up, I'll hand it over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for attending this evening's Landlord Education Series. My name is Abdi Sofe. I'm the New American Initiative Coordinator at the Department of Neighborhood, City of Columbus. Columbus is proud to be a welcoming city for all. As the 14th largest city in the United States, Columbus, and the state of Ohio's capital city, Columbus is home to more than 155,000, and in some estimates, nearly 180,000 residents who were born in nations including Bhutan, Somalia, Democratic Republic of Congo, India, Mexico, among many other national origins. In fact, with Columbus City Schools, there are more than 100 different languages spoken in Columbus. But The story of immigration is not a new one for our city. Columbus has long been a destination for those arriving in our nation, and this is seen in Columbus neighborhoods, historical neighborhoods like German Village, Italian Village, Hungarian Village, and many other neighborhoods. More recently, Ohio was notified in early September that the state will take about 855 Afghan nationals and recent evacuees in the next 6 months, and about 350 of those will start their lives here in the city of Columbus. As landlords in our city, there are many ways that you can help ease the transition of these Afghan refugees by providing stable, affordable, and safe housing environment. Here to speak more about this is Angie Plummer. Angie is the Executive Director of Community Refugee and Immigration Services, also known as CRIS, a nonprofit organization serving refugees and immigrants in Central Ohio. She has been with CRIS since 1998 and started as a volunteer lawyer. Angie became the Executive Director of CRIS in 2003. She is 1998 graduate of the University of Dayton, where she majored in National Studies and minored in German, and is a graduate of the Ohio State University College of Law. Angie is admitted to practice law in Ohio and admitted by the U.S. District Court of Southern District of Ohio. Prior to working at CRIS, Angie worked for the state of Ohio in a private practice. She listed, among many other accomplishments, her participation in resettlement to Columbus, Ohio, of more than 10,000 refugees, and successfully found a resolution of many family reunification cases and asylum cases. Angie lives with her husband and her 2 beautiful children and lives in Columbus, Ohio. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Ms. Angie Plummer.
Thank you, Abdi, for that warm welcome. So great to be welcomed by a friend. So I know you don't want to spend the next half hour listening to me talk about this, but I wanted to give you just some highlights. I'm really for landlords, wanting you to understand more about the social supports that refugees get, to provide a framework. My objective really is to get you to consider renting to refugees, because as Abdi mentioned, we have a large number of people we're expecting shortly, and I want to explain why we think it's a good idea for you to try that. So next slide, please. So just a little bit about CRIS, my 2-minute commercial. There's a list of our services on the screen, and we are a resettlement agency, and I'll talk in a little more detail about that because that's mostly related to the refugee program. But we also provide employment and English language services, immigration legal services. So we, pre-COVID, had 2 days a week where anyone could come in for intake and talk to one of our 2 attorneys. That's gone to more of a virtual process now, but we still do intake. So anyone who needs a consultation with an attorney for an immigration-related matter, we can help with that. We have a health and wellness program, victims of crime advocates, a range of family services from the Help Me Grow program, working with children with developmental delays, to the other end of the age spectrum with a senior refugee population. And we have a community connectors programming, which is mentorship. We have about 100 mentors working in Columbus City schools and some of the suburban schools as well. So during COVID, our welcoming mission, like for everyone, took a change, but we've managed to still be delivering food boxes and connecting with families. As many of us experienced the digital divide, helping families get set up with laptops and access to Wi-Fi was also critical to what we worked on. We did a lot of unemployment applications and provided a lot of emergency assistance. So I want to tell you landlords about resettlement agencies and what our responsibilities are and the kind of support that we bring. So the way it works is there are 9 national agencies that have local affiliates like ours, like Chris. So our national agency is Church World Service, and each of the 9 national agencies take a percentage of whatever the pool of refugees that have been approved by the president to come in. So there's a formula, and each get allocated certain nationalities, and then they're sent to us. Something I think it's critical for you as landlords to know is that every refugee gets a pass-through amount of $1,225 per person. So on our slide, we see if we have one person that doesn't go very far, you can barely make a deposit and first month's rent with the money provided. But for the family of 9 from Afghanistan that came 2 weeks ago, that's a significant sum. And so they were able to get someone to lease to them because they made that security deposit and quite a few months' rent. And that landlord was willing to work with us because there was that security in place. So what do we do as a resettlement agency? So the core services are not related to the Afghan program, but for typical refugees, we would get several weeks' notice before someone was coming, and that would trigger us starting to look for housing. With the Afghans, we have maximum a few days' notice before they're coming. So we're looking to lease apartments now so that we can harness that good energy of all the church groups and civic groups and welcome teams. Get those apartments set up now so people can come straight from the airport. They've been sitting on these military bases for a long time now. We'd like for them to have some sort of permanence. We do have a relationship with Airbnb. We have credits through them and through hotels, so we can put them in transitional housing, but it would be ideal for us to give them some permanence, to find them a place to come to directly. With the resettlement program, then, we meet the refugees at the airport. We do a housing and safety orientation with them in the first few days, help them to apply for public benefits. And Social Security cards, there's a new process where they've applied overseas. We're seeing a glitch in that, and that no one's actually getting their cards, but the application's been made, and we have, federal documentation that demonstrates that they have applied. They just haven't gotten the physical card yet. Get kids enrolled in school, help them with their health screening. You should know the Afghans all had COVID vaccines. They started that process on the military bases. Next slide. A program that's been very successful for many years is our employment program, and the job market is very good right now, so we're very optimistic that we can get new refugees employed. We are able, with the pass-through money and some emergency assistance that we get through Church World Service, can guarantee them through 3 months' rent. Then we're looking to community groups, but we know that they've got to get a job right away. They will have public assistance, but we know that's, not going to get it. But we have a good problem of having too many employers right now who are looking for workers. So it's not something I'm worried about, that we can find them jobs. We have employment partners in many industries, really some great programs where they're, at the end of the day, trained to be electricians and providing some, sometimes people need to go and work in the warehouse and do logistics work when they first arrive, because it's most important that they get a job when they first come, and then we also help them to, take that next step once they've learned some English and improve their economic prospects. And I just put a couple of pie charts up just to show the diversity of who's been coming over the last number of years. If you can't see the pie chart, in fiscal year 2017, the biggest group were coming from Bhutan. And as many of you may know, we have a very large Bhutanese Nepali population, the largest in the United States. Next year, then, that was a very diverse year with Bhutanese and Somalis, Iraqis, Eritreans, Congolese, etc. Still Bhutanese, Nepali, and then the Congolese were getting to be a larger group. 2019, Congolese, the Bhutanese, Nepali are pretty much finished. And then the Congolese were the largest group we had in 2019. And 2020 was our lowest year in a long time, largely because of COVID and because a lot of the resettlement infrastructure was negatively impacted during the Trump years. So we're in a process of rebuilding. That year, actually, the Colombians were the largest number that we resettled in 2020. So the Afghans who we are welcoming into our city are coming mostly through this Afghan Placement Assistance Program, and they get that same cash pass-through I was talking about for the refugee program. They're going to be coming quickly. We're hearing that they're trying to move people off the bases before it gets cold, so they're targeting Thanksgiving to try to have a significant number moved off the bases. So we're scrambling to try, that's our primary obstacle, is finding housing right now. So these are some of the challenges we have that we hear from landlords that, oh, you have no proof of income, no credit history. We respond with, we have this one-time pass-through grant. We will often, and we are seeing large families. We were referred a case today of 8 and 9, and typically then we split them into different units. So biggest problems we typically see are maintenance and slow maintenance repairs, or somebody coming in and purchasing a complex and doing renovations and then letting it kind of fall into disrepair and it being a repetitive process, and having to contact, a 1-800 number in Florida to try to get a solution. So that's a challenge we sometimes see. I do want to suggest if you're a landlord and you need help resolving an issue with a tenant, that you think it's a communication issue, we're glad to step in and try to help see. We want that tenant to be happy. We don't want you to be unhappy. We can't solve every last landlord-tenant miscommunication, but would like to try. I know there's community mediation is another place to go for those issues. All right, next slide. Something to keep in mind in terms of employment. With the Afghans, I think it will be a very mixed population. Some will be very well educated. I mean, literally, people were scooped up. And so you have perhaps those who had more means and better education, who were able to access the base, who got out. And keep in mind, these were folks that worked alongside our military and the government for many years, and who put their lives in danger to support our mission. We believe firmly, and there's plenty of studies to show that over time refugees are a significant economic contribution to the community. This is a life-saving program, but it's also a win-win for our community. They're starting businesses, paying taxes, over time. Yes, when they first get here, they may need some assistance when they get started, but over time they give back. And then by the second generation, you see real progress. Plenty of success stories, but we're running out of time. So yes, the ways if you want to welcome refugees are really with economic support. If you have expertise in starting a business, you might be willing to mentor a refugee, and then social supports. You can skip ahead there. So some other ways to be supportive as a landlord or just a community member are attending cultural diversity days. We have plenty of lunch and learn series that are available. Forming a welcome team or being a family partner is a popular opportunity. We have a welcome neighbor training now twice a month. Have a Refugee Speakers Bureau where a refugee can come to your community and talk about their experiences. Next slide. For those who can see the screen, this is really the highlight of my professional life, is going to the airport and seeing families reunited. And so finally, ways to get involved as a volunteer, being an English language partner. There's lots of ways to do that virtually now. Participate in a welcome team. Contact us at volunteer@chris-ohio.org to learn how to get involved. I think that's good. That's it. Thank you, Curtis.
Thank you, Angie Plummer, for that wonderful presentation. If there are landlords who are watching or here in the audience with us, please be sure to contact Chris as they are looking for partners to work with. And as we wrap up, I want to make sure that I do a shameless plug. Tonight is only the second night of our 4-night series, so we do have 2 other nights left. Next Tuesday, October 26th, we will be at the Glenwood Community Center on the west side as we have a discussion around safety. We will have a representative from our Columbus Division of Police discussing crime prevention through environmental design, as well as a representative from the Department of Health talking about group violence intervention, and a representative from our Department of Neighborhoods speaking about the comprehensive neighborhood safety strategy. So join us next Tuesday. And our last night will be Thursday, November 4th, as we will be at the Linden Community Center having a discussion around keeping families at home, which that will include information around eviction prevention, housing stabilization, and other topics. So if you would like to join us, there are in-person spots available. Visit that website I spoke of earlier, which is columbushousing2021.com, and make sure that you register to attend. I would like to say a special thanks to the center manager here at Blackburn Community Center, Cedric Anderson, and his assistant manager for hosting us this evening. And we thank you all joining us virtually, and those of you who are joining us here in person, thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, thanks to our panel. Thank you for joining us, and everyone have a great evening.